Hello, my name is Annalise Freemark, and today I will be presenting a presentation on Christianity and the perceptions of race. The central thesis/research question is, how does Christianity act as a racial project? How have extremist groups used both to justify their racist ideologies? To start, a racial project is defined as simultaneously an interpretation, representation, or explanation of racial dynamics and an effort to reorganize and redistribute resources, either economic, political, or cultural, along particular racial lines. A racist racial project is one that creates or perpetuates racial domination. An example of a racial project could include a TV show that features a sassy black woman, a typical racial stereotype who is contrasted by her white counterparts, who are taken more seriously. Seeing this depiction of a black woman repetitively could cause someone to believe that all black women must be sassy and should not be taken as seriously. This idea of a racial project sets the scene for how Christianity and its ideals have influenced ideas of race. To give a bit of background, Christianity was first persecuted by the ancient Romans because they felt that this new powerful religion was threatening to their own polytheistic religion, and thus was a challenge to the emperor. As such, Christians practiced secretly in private. However, if they were caught, they could be burned alive, eaten by dogs, or tortured in other ways. As the Christian population grew, the religion was ultimately adopted by Emperor Constantine in 313 AD, and worshippers were freed from persecution. As the Bible was being more frequently used, scholars began to try and interpret its text, and that included racial categorization. One of the most prominent scholars and historians of the time was Flavius Josephus. He lived from 37 to 100 AD, and his life's work included descriptions of the Jewish revolt. Josephus was born into a wealthy aristocratic family, where he later joined the Pharisees, a devout Jewish group. He was later appointed as the military commander of Galilee in the Jewish revolt, where he was taken prisoner and saved his own life through his proclamations of being a prophet. After the war, he lived the rest of his life in Rome and wrote historical texts, which are incredibly valuable today because they give modern historians an understanding of what life was like. One of Flavius's most influential works was titled The Antiquities of Jews and Race. In this text, he analyzes sections of the Bible, and in doing so, he created racial categories based off of the groups of the people mentioned in Genesis 10. He ended up categorizing 43 racial categories, some of which included Gomerites, Scythians, and Shusites. His racial categorizations were based upon geographical location rather than the modern-day understanding of a race that relies heavily on phenotypes. After Flavius, other theologians and historians tried their hand in racial categorization within the Bible. Hippolytus changed the names of some of Josephus's categorizations. Gomerites became Cappadocians, Ashkenaz became Sarmatians, Repoths became Syrophoenicians, and Togarmah became Armenians. Another theologian, Jerome, updated Josephus's list, and Isidore of Seville changed a few names as well. This reflects how ideas and categorizations of race change over time. These early racial categories are not used in modern day. However, they do contain important ideas of racial segregation and supremacy. For example, when Nathanael learns that Jesus is from Nazareth, he exclaims, "Nazareth, can anything good come from there?" This reflects early ideas of regional racial categorizations. Within John 4:9, the text reads, "Jews do not associate with Sarmatians," implying ideas of segregation and ethnocentrism. The Jewish people viewed themselves as above Samaritans and believed they were superior. Within Acts 6:1, the majority ethnic group at the time can be seen overseeing and controlling food distribution of widows from the minority ethnic group. Today, these groups would both be seen as Jewish, but the majority ethnic group still viewed themselves as superior and thus believed that they had the right to control an essential source of human life for the lower group, food. This is itself a form of hegemony, as the widows accepted that the majority racial group had the right to control their food and saw it as almost common sense. Within these texts, there are prominent ideas of racial segregation and ethnocentrism, which have translated into modern-day understandings of race due to the prominence of Christianity. While these perceptions of race permeated society, race within ancient Rome was still not a huge factor of life. In fact, African people who had migrated to Rome were not relegated to slavery, as they would be by the British in later years. They were able to achieve positions of power, which were as high as the Romans of the time. Septimus Severus was the first emperor of Rome from Africa. Seneca the Younger said, "In the next place, we ought to consider the whole state of mankind in order to pass a just judgment on all the occurrences of life, for it is unjust to blame individuals for a vice which is common to all." The color of an Ethiop is not remarkable amongst this own people, nor is any man in Germany ashamed of red hair rolled into a knot. You cannot call anything peculiar or disgraceful in a particular man if it is the general characteristic of his nation. Near the end of the 4th century CE, Colchis, city within Rome's jurisdiction, was called the Second Ethiopia. These early treatments of African people subvert the modern idea of race within the U.S. today. As mentioned within the previous slides, ethnicities were first used as a way to categorize groups of people and were not used to justify racist actions. Within the Bible, there is an idea that God loves all of his children. However, this idea would later be undermined by extremist hate groups and their interpretations of the Bible's portrayals of violence. There were frequent depictions of violence within the Bible, specifically of genocide. In the book of Revelations, Sodom and Gomorrah are commanded to be destroyed by the Lord because of their sinful actions, perpetuating the idea that if someone's existence or actions could be viewed as sinful, the right action to take would be violent. In Genesis, God commands the Israelites to conquer each city they come across and not leave anything alive that breathes, completely destroy them. Deuteronomy 20:16-18. These actions were committed by the Lord in the name of fighting against those who were sinful. While this does not directly encourage followers to commit violent acts against sinners and minority groups, it does show that these actions are justifiable by the Lord, the highest and most unquestionable power. This may encourage the idea of segregation between the sinners, typically religious minorities or racial minorities, and the saved. Within the Bible, there are portrayals of slavery as it existed in ancient Rome, Greece, and Jerusalem. These societies provided socio-cultural context for slavery represented within the Bible and how it should be depicted. However, there was no cemented definition of slavery, and thus there were variations. Within ancient Rome, the birthplace of Christianity, slavery was viewed as a necessity and was therefore not unethical. Slaves typically consisted of the losers of a battle, who could often work their way out of their enslavement. While enslaved, the person had no rights, was expected to be invisible, and were a symbol of power for their owners. Slaves were prevalent within all aspects of Roman society, except public office. As the Bible was written based off of the socio-historical context of ancient society at the time, there are many depictions of slavery within it. For example, Ephesians 6:9 says, "Masters, do the same to them and stop your threatening, knowing that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and that there is no partiality with him." In addition, Colossians 4:1 says, "Masters, provide with your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven." Peter 2:18-25 says, "Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps." This encouraged hegemony within those who were enslaved, as it was commanded by God, the highest power. They were forced to accept their fate. Christianity quickly began to spread from the ancient Romans to other surrounding societies as it grew in followers. A notable event within the spread of Christianity was the First Crusade, in which Pope Urban II declared that all Christians need to rally against the Muslim and Jewish nations in the name of spreading Christianity. Jews and Muslims were essentially forced to convert because if they refused, they would be exiled and killed. A quote from Albert of Aix, who was present during this time, says, "Breaking the bolts and doors, they killed the Jews, about 700 in number, who in vain resisted the force and attack of so many thousands. They killed the women also, and with their swords pierced tender children of whatever age and sex. Horrible to say, mothers cut the throats of nursing children with knives and stabbed others, preferring them to perish, thus by their own hands, rather than to be killed by the weapons of the uncircumcised." Pope Urban II justified these horrible actions through what he saw as the valiant effort of spreading Christianity. All other religions were a threat to the Christian beliefs of the time, and so in an effort to control that, he commanded armies to destroy non-Christian cities. In one of his infamous speeches, he said, "On this account I, or rather the Lord, beseech you as Christ's heralds, to publish this everywhere and to persuade all people of whatever rank, foot soldiers and knights, poor and rich, to carry aid promptly to those Christians and to destroy that vile race from the lands of our friends." The Pope also encouraged these monstrous activities with the promise that those that took up arms against sinful cities would be absolved of their past sins and eternal damnation. Within modern-day portrayals of Christianity, Jesus is always portrayed as a white man with long straight hair. This is because within the 4th century AD, Jesus was painted by the Romans and Greeks as a white man, and as the religion spread, the idea took hold, despite Jesus most likely being a man of color. This depiction of a white man was heavily influenced by Greek and Roman gods, who were all white to match the dominant racial group of the time. The picture in the leftmost corner is a Roman/Greek depiction of Jesus that is painted in the basilica. This depiction draws a parallel to the paintings next to it, Aphrodite and Ares in the middle, and Pallas and the Centaur on the right. All of the gods are portrayed as fairly white, and because Jesus was slowly becoming a higher power in their eyes, he was painted in the style of the gods of the time. While the Bible does have some instances of displayed oppression, instances where the Bible is used as justification for racism and prejudice is typically seen through humans' tendency to project anthropomorphic qualities onto the unknown. Anthropomorphic projectionism is defined as the attribution of human characteristics or behaviors to a god, animal, or object. The types of anthropomorphic projectionism include concrete anthropomorphism, which is when a deity is not physically present but can be seen or heard, as in Genesis 20:13. They also include immanent anthropomorphism, in which it presents the deity as immediately present in a non-literal and non-embodied nature. The third type is transcendent anthropomorphism, in which the deity is not concretely embodied or explicitly envisioned and is not immanent, placing them in the heavens doing human activities. And the fourth type of anthropomorphism is figurative anthropomorphism, in which a deity is within a certain imagery, such as having a righteous hand. Because humans have a tendency to fear the unknown, they are likely to project human-like qualities onto the unknown, such as God. Anthropomorphic projectionism is evidenced in Stuart Guthrie's theory, in which anthropomorphism is a rational human approach to ambiguity in that people interpret the world with human qualities because human thought is the highest power they know. This theory is explained through the concept of ontological knowledge, which is that human knowledge of the way things are based on how they make sense of the world and the integration into the world. Entities that do not conform to existing ontological knowledge and those that humans do not have access to present a challenge. In turn, humans construct entities that are complex to construe according to their being and identity because of the immediate knowledge of self. This can be seen in how many of the Bible verses are written. For example, in Genesis 1:27 it says, "So God created humankind in his image." This is in itself an anthropomorphic projection, because if God created humans in his image, then God is assumed to have human-like tendencies and qualities. Within the Old Testament, there are countless depictions of violence made by God. For example, at midnight the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. Exodus 12:29. In addition, Judges 19 portrays violent gang rapes of a woman, and Deuteronomy 32:39 says, "I kill and I make alive, I wound and I heal, and no one can deliver from my hand." The Old Testament was constructed upon the socio-historical context of the time, filled with war, violence, and sexual assault. Thus, the Old Testament itself is an anthropomorphic projection, because God is portrayed as violent and as turbulent as the history is. When writing the Old Testament, the authors were surrounded by violence and war, and so it only makes sense to project God as a God filled with wrath and violence. The violence may have seemed senseless at the time, and so to make sense of it, they placed God in the middle of it. The study, "When God Sanctions Killing: Effect of Scriptural Violence on Aggression," conducted by Brad J. Bushman et al. In 2007, connects the justification of violence with religion, specifically those that are highly religious. The study was conducted at Brigham Young University with 298 Mormon students and at a Dutch university with 242 Dutch students with varying religious practices. Participants were given a story, and half were told that it was from the New Testament, and the other half were told that it was from a historical scroll. The story said that a man and his concubine traveled to Gibeah, where the man's concubine is forced out of the house they are staying in and gang raped and killed. The man then travels back to his Israelite tribe and asks what he should do to the tribe who killed his concubine. Half of the participants were given the scripture. The assembly fasted and prayed before the Lord and asked, "What shall be done about the sins of our brothers in Benjamin?" And the Lord answered them, saying that no such abomination could stand among his people. The Lord commanded Israel to take arms against their brothers and chasten them before the Lord. Participants were then paired together and told to press a button faster than their partner. The slower reaction time would get frequency played in their headphones that the winner would choose. Those who believed in God and believed the passage was from the Bible had an aggression score of 10, while those who did not believe in God and got the passage from the Bible had an aggression score of around 7.5. Those who believed in God and got the historical text received an aggression score of around 5, while those who didn't believe and got the historical text had an aggression score of around 6. In another study entitled "Scriptural Engagement, Communication with God, and Moral Behavior Among Children" that was conducted in 2010, they surveyed 1,009 children aged 8 to 12 online and compared how often the children practiced Christianity with their morality. They specifically looked at destructive thought patterns, which was defined as violence to oneself or others, destroying property, etc. Those who attended church less than once a month had 17.4% destructive thought patterns. 22.3% of those children who attended church at least once a month had destructive thought patterns. 17.3% of those children who didn't pray once a day had destructive thought patterns. 17.7% of those children who prayed at least once a day had destructive thought patterns. 17.1% of children who had no days reading the Bible had destructive thought patterns. 16.7% of children reading the Bible 1 to 3 days during the week had destructive thought patterns, and 20.1% of children who read the Bible 4+ days a week had destructive thought patterns. While these numbers are not drastic, it does show an increase in violence correlated with practicing Christianity more frequently. Stephen Clark, a senior research fellow in the Center for Applied Philosophy and Public Ethics at Charles Sturt University in Australia, and a senior research fellow at the Uehiro Center for Practical Ethics at the University of Oxford, developed 3 theories of the justification of religious violence. These theories include invocation of a cosmic war. One feels as though their higher being is telling them to start a war or a war is coming, similar to Manson's Helter Skelter. Another one is appeal to protecting one's spot in the afterlife. If one feels their salvation is threatened, they may dive into self-preservation and will do anything to earn back their ideal afterlife. Another one is feeling that punishment must be dealt for desecrating sacred values. If a person or group goes against sacred values of a religion, those within the religion may act to right a wrong, i.e., bombings at an abortion clinic. This leads to the formation of extremist racist religious groups like the KKK or the Ku Klux Klan. The KKK has taken pieces of scripture from the Bible to justify their reasoning that the modern Christian religion is now under the control of Satan. The KKK believes that the Bible is the family history of the white race, making white Christians superior. They believe that the 12 tribes of Israel within the Old Testament are the origins of the white race, and that the white people have been the only people who have been continuously following the teachings of the Bible. They view other races as mud people and see them as being similar to untamed beasts. They use biblical symbolism such as cross burnings, which are meant to send Jesus' light into the world, and white robes, which represent white purity. Their symbol, the mystic symbol of a Klansman, has a red drop, which symbolizes the atonement and sacrifice of Jesus and those who have shed blood protecting the white race. The KKK was founded in 1865 by Confederate veterans and led by Nathaniel Bedford Forrest as a way to promote discrimination and hatred of Black people in the Civil War. In 1870, the KKK had a base in almost every southern state, but by 1876, they lost control of the states to the Democrats. The KKK was revived in 1915 by Protestant nativists, and by 1920, the Klan had reached their height, with over 4 million followers. Between 1930 and 1940, memberships decreased because of the Great Depression and World War II. However, there was a renewal in the 1960s because of the Civil Rights Movement, and by the 1990s, the Klan still had between 6,000 to 10,000 active members in the Deep South. 3 years ago, in 2017, the Klan had an increase in numbers with the election of Donald Trump, with a base in nearly 22 states and 3,000 confirmed members. The KKK has had a long history of acts of violence against people of color. For example, the Tulsa Race Riot, which occurred May 31st through June 1st in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, lasted for 14 hours, with white rioters killing around 300 Black Tulsans, and they also leveled the Black part of town using planes and fires. The riot began after thousands of white people tried to lynch a Black teen accused of assaulting a white teen. Police arrested thousands of Black people, despite white people looting and being the ones murdering other people. The year later, 1922, almost all local positions in politics were filled by KKK members. Another example is the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Alabama, September 15, 1963. This happened 2 weeks after MLK's I Have a Dream speech, in which KKK members bombed a church with 200 people inside, killing 4 children and injuring 22 others. No one was charged until one Klansman in 1977, and 2 others were charged in 2001 and 2002. To continue, the Greensboro Massacre occurred on November 3, 1979 in North Carolina. 40 members of the KKK and American Nazi Party began shooting into the crowd at an anti-Klan rally, and they killed 5. Despite being filmed by the news, the Klan members were acquitted by an all-white jury with the claim of self-defense. By 2009, the Greensboro City Council passed a resolution of regret. In addition, the Overland Park Jewish Community Center was shot up on April 13, 2014 in Kansas. Klan member Frazier Glenn Miller killed 3 people, including a 14-year-old boy, in an attempt to kill as many Jews as possible. However, he failed because all 3 victims were Christian. He received the death sentence and yelled "Sieg Heil," giving the Nazi salute in court. He also attended the Greensboro Massacre, which could have been prevented had he had repercussions for his actions then. In conclusion, the Bible portrays many violent acts committed by God, which can be boiled down to anthropomorphic projectionism. Anthropomorphic projectionism lives within the human psyche and allows humans to place human-like qualities onto God to work out its ambiguity. This can serve as justification for religious violence because if the worshiper is violent themselves, they will thus project that onto God, which can lead to violent actions justified by the highest known power. In extreme cases, this can lead to extremist religious groups such as the KKK that do act on their violent interpretations. Ultimately, God and the Bible can spur violence due to humans' tendency to project themselves onto God. And these are a list of my sources. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed.